The ocean wind howled across the rusted deck of the decommissioned oil rig as the Navy SEAL team set up their long-range target test. The rig sat 20 miles off the coast, isolated, battered by waves that slapped its support columns like angry fists. A massive steel plate had been bolted to a far platform, nearly a mile away over open water, and the officers stood around, confident and smirking. The challenge had been issued days ago in a briefing room full of elite soldiers, men who had fought through desert storms and jungle firefights. The target was nearly impossible, a 4-inch circle in the dead center of that plate, swaying slightly in the wind, with unpredictable ocean currents creating a heat mirage between the shooter and the mark. The SEAL officer, Commander Rourke, a tall man with a reputation for arrogance, had laughed when the target was first shown. "No one can hit that," he scoffed, his voice carrying over the roar of the ocean as he adjusted his cap. His men chuckled in agreement, a chorus of hardened warriors who had spent years perfecting their craft. That's why it's called a theoretical exercise. It's about pushing limits, not actually making the shot. They were wrong. In the crowd that day stood a woman most of them barely noticed, her dark hair tied back simply, her clothes plain and unassuming. Her name was Sarah Whitlock, and to them she looked like she didn't belong. A civilian volunteer helping with logistics, someone they assumed handled paperwork or medical supplies. She wasn't part of the SEALs, and most of the men didn't even know why she was there. Sarah had grown up far from the ocean, on a small farm tucked into the misty foothills of Montana. Her childhood had been marked by endless fields, sharp mountain winds, and a father who had taught her to shoot before she could even properly shoulder a rifle. While other children played games, she spent her evenings lying in the grass with a beat-up .22, learning how to account for wind, distance, and breath control. Her father believed in discipline and patience, telling her that a true marksman never rushed, never boasted, never sought glory. When she was 16, her skills were so precise that local hunters would whisper about the farmer's daughter who could drop a deer at 500 yards with iron sights. But tragedy struck when a wildfire took their home and her father's life, leaving Sarah to rebuild on her own. She carried his teachings silently, never flaunting her abilities, simply working and surviving. Years later, through a chain of events that included volunteering during a natural disaster and demonstrating uncanny skill with rescue equipment, she had been brought into a support role for the military. She didn't wear medals or carry rank, and the SEALs around her saw only a helper, someone who carried ammo crates or fetched water during training. So when Commander Rourke declared the shot impossible, Sarah remained silent, her calm eyes scanning the rig and the distant target. The men took turns that morning, each sniper setting up on the deck, adjusting for wind, then failing spectacularly. Bullets smacked into the waves, ricocheted off the plate's edges, or vanished into the mist. Each miss only fueled Rourke's smugness. "See? Like I said. Physics don't lie," he barked, clapping one of his men on the shoulder. "The distance, the sway, the mirage, this isn't about skill, it's about reality. You can't bend it." Sarah's voice cut through the laughter, soft but steady. "I can hit it," she said simply. The words froze the group. Several men turned, eyebrows raised, trying to determine if she was joking. Rourke stared at her, his grin widening into outright mockery. "You?" he asked, drawing the word out like an insult. "Ma'am, no offense, but this isn't a carnival game. That's a mile out over open water in high crosswind. My best snipers just failed repeatedly." Sarah didn't flinch. "You said no one could do it. I'm someone." The deck went silent. The ocean crashed below, gulls screeching overhead. Finally Rourke laughed, loud and sharp. "All right, sweetheart, take your shot. Hell, I'll even wager on it. If you hit that target, I don't know, I'll eat my cap right here on this deck." His men roared with laughter, the bet sealing the moment into a spectacle. Sarah simply nodded and walked toward the sniper rifle set up on its bipod, her movements unhurried, precise. She lay prone on the rough deck, feeling the vibrations of the rig beneath her ribs. The rifle was top of the line, but Sarah treated it like the old hunting rifle she'd grown up with. She checked the scope, made minute adjustments to the stock, and then closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. Around her, the SEALs jeered, tossing out jokes and crude comments, but she shut them all out. In her mind, she wasn't on a rig with a dozen skeptics. She was back in Montana, the wind carrying the scent of pine, her father's calm voice beside her. "Slow your heart. Feel the air. Watch the mirage dance and don't fight it, flow with it." She opened her eyes and scanned the distance. The target swayed slightly, a tiny silver glint in the mist. She noted the angle of the sun, the way heat shimmered above the water, the subtle rhythm of the wind gusts. Each factor became a number, a correction, an instinct. She adjusted for elevation, then windage, her hands moving with the ease of long practice. When she was ready, she didn't announce it. She simply exhaled halfway, paused, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the rifle rang out, echoing across the water. For a moment, there was only silence as the men squinted, unsure. Then a metallic ping drifted back through the mist, unmistakable and clear. The 4-inch circle had been struck dead center. The silence that followed was heavier than the ocean air. Rourke's mouth fell open, his laugh frozen mid-breath. One of the younger SEALs swore under his breath, shaking his head. Sarah remained prone for a second longer, then calmly rose to her feet, brushing grit from her hands. "One shot," she said quietly, not as a boast but as a statement of fact. The men stared, their confidence shattered, their understanding of skill rewritten in a single instant. Rourke tried to recover his composure, forcing a grin. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Another sniper immediately volunteered to try again, his pride wounded. He took the position, adjusted carefully, fired, and missed by 3 feet. The ping of Sarah's perfect shot still seemed to echo in the salty air. Slowly, realization dawned on the group. What they had witnessed wasn't luck or trickery. It was mastery. Sarah turned to leave, uninterested in their reactions, but Rourke stopped her. "Wait," he said, his tone softer now. Where did you learn to shoot like that?" She paused, her back to them. "From my father," she replied. He believed a steady hand and a clear mind could solve any problem. With that, she walked away, leaving Rourke and his team staring at the distant target, humbled by a woman they had dismissed moments before. None of them spoke as the ocean roared around them, the impossible shot a legend born right before their eyes. The days that followed Sarah's unbelievable shot were filled with a mixture of awe, tension, and disbelief among the SEAL team. The story spread like wildfire through the ranks, whispered in barracks and chow halls, growing in detail with each retelling. Some swore she'd split the target perfectly in half, others claimed she had made the shot blindfolded, and a few insisted there must have been some hidden trick, some sleight of hand that explained it all. Commander Rourke, humiliated before his own men, tried to control the narrative by downplaying the event, dismissing it as a fluke, a moment of freak coincidence never to be repeated. But deep down he couldn't shake the memory of that crisp metallic ping echoing across the misty water, nor the calm, unshakable look in Sarah's eyes. For a man who had spent his life commanding elite warriors, it unsettled him more than he cared to admit. Meanwhile, Sarah went about her duties as though nothing had happened, quietly hauling supplies, maintaining equipment and coordinating logistics for upcoming training operations. She didn't gloat, didn't seek recognition, and certainly didn't challenge Rourke again, though the men watched her now with a new mixture of respect and wariness. Rourke's pride wouldn't let the matter rest. Late one evening, as the sun sank in a fiery blaze over the horizon, he sat alone in the command shack, staring at maps and training reports, his jaw tight. He prided himself on being the best of the best, a man whose authority came not just from rank but from skill and unshakable confidence. Sarah's presence threatened that image. He replayed every detail of the event in his mind. Her slow, deliberate breathing, her measured adjustments, the effortless way she had read the wind and distance. There had been no hesitation, no uncertainty. She had acted with the calm precision of a master, and it gnawed at him. Finally, he decided he needed answers. The next morning he ordered a background check on Sarah, bypassing standard protocol to dig deeper than he had any right to. The results shocked him. Sarah Whitlock wasn't just a random civilian helper. Her father, Robert Whitlock, had been a legendary marksman during his time in the military, though his exploits were buried under classified operations. He had trained Special Forces snipers in techniques that bordered on art rather than science, and his methods were said to be so advanced that only a handful of soldiers had ever truly mastered them. When Robert retired, he vanished into rural obscurity, raising his daughter far from the world of war. Reading the file, Rourke began to understand. Sarah wasn't a fluke. She was the culmination of decades of expertise, a prodigy forged in silence. Armed with this knowledge, Rourke's curiosity grew into something sharper. If Sarah could hit that impossible shot once, could she do more? Could she replicate it under pressure, in real combat conditions? His mind turned toward an upcoming classified mission, one involving a high-value target hidden deep within enemy territory. The mission was already considered near suicidal. The target was heavily fortified, protected by overlapping defenses, and positioned in a mountainous region where traditional approaches were doomed to fail. The only chance of success involved taking out a key communications array from an extreme distance before the assault team moved in. None of Rourke's snipers had managed to achieve consistent accuracy at that range during simulations. But Sarah, she might be the wild card they needed. The idea of depending on a civilian unsettled him, yet the image of that perfect shot haunted him still. The following day Rourke approached Sarah directly. The rest of the team watched with open curiosity as their commander, usually so dominant and dismissive, stood before the quiet woman who had humbled them all. "Walk with me," he said tersely. Sarah set down the crate she'd been carrying and followed without a word, her expression unreadable. They walked to the far edge of the rig, away from prying eyes, the wind tugging at their clothes. Rourke crossed his arms, staring out at the churning sea. "I know who you are now," he began. "Or at least who your father was." Sarah didn't react, which irritated him. "You've got skill, Whitlock. Skill my men can't match, maybe skill no one else in this unit has ever seen. I've got a mission coming up, one that could save lives, or cost them if we fail. I need a shooter who can do the impossible. I need you." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her dark eyes steady. "I'm not a soldier," she said quietly. "I don't kill for orders. My father taught me to protect, not to seek glory." Rourke gritted his teeth. "This isn't about glory. It's about stopping a threat before it hits our shores. You'll be saving lives." His voice softened slightly. "Look, I don't like asking this, but I've seen what you can do. Without that shot, good men will die." Sarah turned away, watching the waves crash below. Memories of her father flooded her mind, the smell of gun oil, his patient voice guiding her through countless hours of practice, his insistence that precision wasn't about ego but responsibility. He had always feared the world would try to use her skills for destruction. But he had also taught her that there were moments when standing by meant letting evil win. Slowly she nodded. "I'll do it. But on one condition, I choose the shot. I won't take it unless I believe it's right." Rourke hesitated, then agreed. "Fine. You'll have full discretion." With that, the deal was struck. Training for the mission began immediately. Rourke's men were initially skeptical, some even resentful, but as they watched Sarah work, their attitudes shifted. She wasn't just good, she was otherworldly. She demonstrated techniques they'd never seen, reading wind patterns by watching ripples on water, adjusting for distance without a rangefinder, even predicting enemy movement based on subtle environmental cues. Under her guidance, their shooting improved, though none could match her raw instinct. Even Rourke, hardened by years of combat, found himself silently impressed as he observed from a distance. Sarah remained humble throughout, never raising her voice, never mocking their failures. She moved through the training grounds like a ghost, quiet and focused, always testing herself against harder challenges. As the mission approached, tension gripped the entire team. They were to be inserted by night into a hostile region, navigating treacherous terrain before Sarah would take her shot. If she succeeded, the communications array would go down, giving the assault team a narrow window to strike. If she failed, they would be walking into a slaughter. On the night of departure, the mood aboard the transport helicopter was grim. The rotors thumped above, drowning out all but shouted words. Rourke sat beside Sarah, his face grim beneath the red glow of the interior lights. "You ready?" he asked, almost shouting over the noise. Sarah simply nodded, her expression calm. "Stay steady," she said. "Watch your men. I'll handle the rest." Her voice was so certain that even the most anxious soldiers felt a surge of confidence. They touched down on a barren ridge just before dawn, the air thin and biting cold. The mountains stretched like jagged teeth under a pale sky, and somewhere beyond lay the enemy compound. Sarah set up her rifle with methodical care, her hands sure despite the frigid wind. Through her scope, she saw the array, a spindly tower bristling with antennas, guarded by armed men. The shot would be beyond extreme range, with shifting crosswinds and swirling fog. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, feeling the rhythm of the earth beneath her. When she opened them, the world narrowed to a single point. Behind her, Rourke and his men waited, their lives balanced on the weight of her trigger finger. She exhaled slowly and took the shot. The silence stretched, then the tower erupted in a spray of sparks and collapsing metal. A perfect hit. The men erupted into cheers, their earlier doubts erased in a single breathtaking moment. Rourke stared at Sarah with something close to reverence. For the second time, she had done the impossible. The explosion of the communications tower lit up the dawn sky like a brief sunrise, shards of metal raining down into the valley as smoke billowed upward. For a moment, the enemy camp was frozen in confusion, guards spinning in every direction, shouting orders that dissolved into chaos without their central command system. Rourke's men didn't waste a second. Moving with well-practiced precision, they swept down the mountainside like shadows, weapons ready, faces grim behind their gear. Sarah remained prone at her vantage point, scanning the area through her scope, calm and unhurried despite the adrenaline surging around her. Her role wasn't done. She wasn't just a shooter now, she was the Overwatch, the silent guardian ensuring the team reached their objective alive. Through the magnified lens, she saw enemy soldiers rushing to regroup, their confusion giving way to coordinated defense. She whispered into her comm, her voice cool and controlled. 2 hostiles left ridge 30 meters above you. Wait for my mark. Before Rourke could even acknowledge, 2 shots cracked out in rapid succession. Both men dropped without a sound, their rifles clattering to the rocks. The team advanced unhindered. Rourke glanced back at Sarah's distant silhouette, a flicker of awe passing across his usually stern face. As they pushed deeper into enemy territory, resistance grew fiercer. Automatic gunfire erupted from hidden bunkers, grenades arced through the air, and the narrow mountain paths became killing zones. But every time the SEALs seemed pinned down, Sarah's calm voice guided them. Suppressing fire, right flank, 3 seconds, now move. Her timing was flawless, each instruction saving lives. The men who days ago had laughed at her, now depended on her completely, trusting her instincts without question. They began to see what Rourke had started to suspect. Sarah wasn't just a marksman, she was a force multiplier, turning an impossible mission into something achievable. Hours passed in a blur of movement and violence. By mid-morning, the team reached the edge of the enemy compound. A sprawling network of concrete bunkers and steel fences nestled in a natural bowl surrounded by cliffs. This was where the real challenge began. Without the communications tower, the defenders were operating blindly, but sheer numbers still posed a deadly threat. Rourke signaled his men to take cover behind a rocky outcrop while he assessed. Sarah remained on the ridge, her rifle steady, her breathing even. "You've got a window," she said into the comm, "but it won't stay open. Enemy reinforcements are moving in from the east. You've got 20 minutes before you're surrounded." Rourke cursed under his breath. "Copy that. We move now." The assault began with brutal efficiency. Flashbangs and suppressive fire gave the SEALs their opening, and they stormed the outer perimeter, cutting through defenses with lethal precision. Sarah's rifle spoke constantly from above, each shot perfectly placed, taking down threats before they could even raise their weapons. Rourke coordinated with her seamlessly, as though they had trained together for years instead of days. At one point, an enemy sniper nearly took out one of his men. Sarah saw the glint of the rival's scope a heartbeat before he fired. Without hesitation, she squeezed her trigger. Her bullet struck first, shattering the enemy's scope and dropping him instantly. "Sniper neutralized," she said calmly. The rescued SEAL gasped his thanks into the comm, but Sarah didn't respond. She was already scanning for the next threat. Inside the compound, the team fought room to room, clearing bunkers with precision and speed. The air was thick with smoke and dust, the stench of gunpowder and fear mingling in the confined spaces. Rourke led from the front, his rifle barking, his commands sharp and decisive. But even his experience couldn't prevent the inevitable. They were outnumbered and the tide was slowly turning against them. Just as they reached the central control building, enemy forces began to pour in from all sides, cutting off their escape routes. Bullets ricocheted off walls and equipment, forcing the SEALs into cover. Over the comm, Sarah's voice remained steady. "Commander, you're boxed in. Recommend fallback." Rourke snarled, frustrated. "Negative. We're too close to pull out now. We need an opening." Sarah's mind worked quickly. From her elevated position, she could see the entire battlefield like a living map. There, a fuel truck parked near the eastern gate, half hidden behind debris. If she could detonate it, the explosion would create both chaos and a breach for escape. But it was a nearly impossible shot. The truck's fuel line was the size of a pencil, swaying slightly in the heat shimmer. Missing could mean disaster. Sarah thought of her father's teachings, his quiet insistence that every shot carried weight. She adjusted her scope, factoring in wind, distance, even the vibration of the rig in her bones. The world narrowed until there was only her, the rifle, and the target. She exhaled, held her breath halfway and fired. The explosion was instantaneous and massive. Fire blossomed into the sky, a rolling wave of heat and smoke that swallowed the eastern gate. Enemy soldiers screamed in confusion, scattering as their defensive lines collapsed. "Breach. Move now." Sarah barked into the comm, her calm tone suddenly commanding. Rourke didn't hesitate. He led his men through the chaos, cutting a path straight to freedom. As they emerged into the open air, The sun was fully risen, casting long shadows across the battlefield. Behind them the compound burned. Sarah covered their retreat, picking off stragglers with surgical precision. Finally, the team reached the extraction point, a rocky clearing where a helicopter waited, rotors thundering. As the last man climbed aboard, Rourke turned back to look at Sarah's ridge. For a heartbeat he feared she wouldn't make it. Then she appeared, moving swiftly down the slope, rifle slung across her back. She climbed into the chopper without a word, settling into a seat as though she'd just finished a day's work rather than saved an entire team. Rourke sat opposite her, staring. The other men cheered and slapped each other on the back, their relief palpable, but Sarah simply stared out the open door, her expression unreadable. During the flight back, Rourke finally spoke. "You saved us," he said quietly so only she could hear. Sarah didn't look at him. "I kept my promise," she replied. "I took the shot because it was right." Her words struck him deeply. For all his years of service he realized he'd never met anyone like her. When they landed on the rig hours later, the team disembarked to a hero's welcome. Higher command had been monitoring the mission remotely, and news of its success spread quickly. But as medals were prepared and reports filed, Sarah slipped away, uninterested in accolades. Rourke found her alone on the deck, gazing out at the sea. "You could have anything you want," he said. "A rank, a permanent position, hell, your own unit." Sarah shook her head. "I'm not a soldier," she repeated. "I came because it mattered. That's enough." She turned to leave, but Rourke stopped her with one last question. "What will you do now?" She smiled faintly, the first true smile he'd seen from her. "Go home. Back to the quiet. Maybe teach some kid how to breathe steady and see the world clearly." With that, she walked away, leaving Rourke standing in silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the commander realized something profound. Sarah Whitlock had done more than save his men. She had reminded them all that true skill, true courage, didn't come from rank or reputation. It came from within, from a steady hand, a clear mind, and the willingness to do what others thought impossible. And though she would disappear back into obscurity, her legend would live on, whispered among warriors as the story of the simple woman who proved them all wrong. The rig was quiet that night, the ocean a restless black expanse stretching endlessly in every direction, the waves thudding against the steel supports below like a slow, rhythmic heartbeat. Most of the SEALs were gathered inside, celebrating their hard-won victory with laughter and loud music, but Rourke stood alone on the upper deck, staring out at the horizon, his mind far from the noise below. The mission had been an undeniable success, but it left him unsettled. Sarah's departure earlier that day had been so abrupt, so final, and now he couldn't stop replaying every moment since she had appeared in their lives. She had arrived quietly, unassuming, been dismissed as insignificant, then proven herself beyond measure. She'd saved his team, destroyed a fortified enemy compound, and disappeared without asking for recognition. Men like Rourke thrived on reputation and command, but Sarah seemed to exist outside those rules entirely, answering only to her own principles. It was humbling, and more than that, it was confusing. As he stood there, lost in thought, one of his men approached, Lieutenant Dawson, a wiry, sharp-eyed soldier who had been with Rourke through countless battles. "Sir," Dawson said, snapping a quick salute, "we've got chatter coming in from command. Debrief starts at 0600. They want you ready with a full report." Rourke grunted his acknowledgement but didn't move. Dawson hesitated, then added, "Sir, about Whitlock, the men are talking. They're saying she's some kind of ghost sniper. Some of them think she isn't even real." Rourke finally turned, his expression unreadable. "She's real," he said flatly. "And she's better than any of us." While Rourke grappled with his thoughts, Sarah was already miles away, sitting in the back of a transport truck bouncing along a rough coastal road. The military had arranged for her return to the mainland without ceremony, as per her request. She sat silently, hands resting in her lap, watching the passing darkness through the open tailgate. Her rifle was packed carefully beside her, though she didn't expect to use it again for a very long time. The mission was over, but the memories lingered, the sharp crack of her shots, the smell of gunpowder and smoke, the faces of men whose lives had depended on her precision. She felt no pride in what she had done, only a quiet relief that it was finished. She thought of her father, of the lessons he'd drilled into her over the years. "Never let the world change who you are," he'd said once as they cleaned rifles together by the light of a lantern. "A steady hand and a clear mind, Sarah. That's all you need. Don't let them twist it into something ugly." She clung to those words now, as the truck rattled toward the small airfield where she would catch a civilian flight home. Her goal was simple, return to her quiet life, her quiet land, and leave the chaos behind. But chaos had a way of following those who didn't seek it. Far away, in a secure bunker deep within a foreign nation's mountains, the mission's failure was being analyzed with cold fury. The destroyed communications array had been the cornerstone of their defense network, and its loss had allowed the SEAL team to breach and destroy valuable assets. The enemy commander, a scarred and calculating man named General Kirinov, paced before a wall of monitors displaying static-filled images from the battle. His second-in-command stood rigidly at attention, sweating under the general's withering glare. "How?" Kirinov demanded, his voice a low growl. "Did a single team manage to do this? How did they slip past our defenses, destroy my array, and leave us blind?" The subordinate stammered, "Sir, our intelligence suggests they had unusual support. A sniper, perhaps. One far beyond normal capability." Kirinov stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "A sniper," he repeated. "Then we will find this ghost and destroy her. No one humiliates me in lives." His fist slammed into the table, rattling the monitors. Orders were given, and within hours Kirinov's network of spies and operatives began combing through every scrap of information. Slowly they pieced together a picture. A woman not officially part of the SEALs, present only on the periphery of reports. No rank, no file photo, just whispers and anomalies. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start hunting. Back in the States, Rourke completed his debriefing with command, leaving out only one detail: Sarah. Officially, her role was classified as logistical support, her direct actions buried beneath layers of bureaucracy. Rourke did this deliberately, knowing she valued her privacy and independence. But he also knew it couldn't last forever. Men like General Kirinov didn't accept defeat quietly, and if Sarah had been their undoing, she would be in danger. Rourke considered sending someone to watch over her, but he dismissed the idea. Sarah was more than capable of protecting herself. Still, unease gnawed at him. Later that evening he pulled Dawson aside. "Keep your ear to the ground," he ordered. "If you hear anything about enemy movement stateside, anything at all, you come straight to me." Dawson nodded sharply. "Yes, sir." Sarah's return to her hometown was quiet, almost anticlimactic. The small Montana town hadn't changed in her absence. The same cracked sidewalks, the same dusty general store, the same rolling fields stretching toward distant mountains. Her cabin stood at the edge of her property, sturdy and isolated, surrounded by tall pines. She unpacked slowly, savoring the return to routine. She spent her first morning walking the fence line, checking for damage, then sat on her porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. For a few blissful days, it felt like the mission had been nothing but a strange dream. She didn't speak to anyone about it, not even when neighbors waved as they drove past on the old county road. But beneath the surface she remained alert. Years of training had given her a sixth sense for danger, and something about the stillness felt wrong. Birds fell silent at odd times, and once she found fresh boot prints near her property line. Sarah's instincts told her she was being watched. Her suspicions were confirmed one night when she heard the low hum of an engine approaching long after dark. Moving silently, she retrieved her rifle and crouched by the window, watching as two black SUVs rolled slowly up the dirt road. Their headlights were off, their movements deliberate. Sarah's pulse remained steady as she loaded a round and peered through her scope. Men emerged, heavily armed, scanning the area with military precision. These weren't locals. They weren't lost hikers or curious tourists. They were hunters, and she was their prey. Calmly, she slipped out the back door, moving through the trees like a shadow. She didn't want a firefight near her cabin. She needed to draw them away, control the battlefield the way her father had taught her. She circled wide, then set up on a ridge overlooking the road. From there, she watched as the men began to spread out, searching. She waited until one stepped into the open, then fired. He dropped instantly, and the others dove for cover, shouting in a language she recognized from the mission reports. Kirinov's men. Her mind worked quickly. If they were here, Kirinov must already know her identity, or at least suspect it. That meant more would follow. The fight was swift and brutal. Sarah moved between positions, never staying in one spot long enough to be tracked. One by one, the invaders fell until only silence remained, broken only by the distant rustle of wind through pine needles. When it was over, she retrieved her spent casings and buried the bodies deep in the forest, erasing every trace of the encounter. As dawn broke, she sat on her porch again, sipping coffee as though nothing had happened. But inside her thoughts raced. This wasn't over. They would keep coming, and next time they might bring more men, or worse, go after innocent townsfolk to flush her out. She couldn't allow that. That evening Sarah made a decision. She packed a small bag, checked her rifle, and left a note on her table. "If I don't come back, the land goes to Mrs. Green down the road." She locked the cabin behind her and vanished into the night. Her plan was simple: take the fight to Kirinov before he could escalate. She didn't tell Rourke or anyone else. This was her burden to carry, and she would bear it alone. As she hiked through the dark woods toward a hidden trailhead, her father's voice echoed in her memory once more. A steady hand and a clear mind. Sarah tightened her grip on her rifle. The hunt had begun, and this time she wasn't waiting for the enemy to find her. Sarah moved through the darkness like a whisper, her boots silent on the damp forest floor as she followed the hidden path leading to an old ranger station deep in the mountains. It was long abandoned, a relic from decades past, but she had kept it in mind for years as a potential fallback point. She reached it just before dawn, the first pale light brushing the horizon, and slipped inside. The interior smelled of dust and aged wood, but it was dry and secure. Sarah set her pack down on the table and unfolded a weathered map she had brought. Her mind worked methodically as she marked possible enemy approach routes, supply lines, and escape paths. She didn't have Rourke's resources or the backing of an elite unit, but she had something the enemy didn't: a lifetime of patience and intimate knowledge of the land, and an unmatched ability to see patterns others missed. General Kirinov would expect her to run or hide. Instead, she would strike at him directly, dismantling his operation piece by piece until he had nowhere left to hide. 2 nights later, she began her hunt. Moving under cover of darkness, she tracked the remnants of the team that had attacked her cabin. Her years of hunting with her father had taught her to read the signs of movement others would overlook. A broken branch here, a displaced rock there, faint tire tracks on a dirt road. These men were professionals, but they weren't woodsmen. By the second night, she found their temporary camp tucked into a remote canyon. There were more of them than she expected, at least a dozen, armed and organized. From her vantage point high above, she studied their routines carefully, memorizing sentry rotations, weapon placements, and escape routes. She didn't rush. Her father's lessons echoed in her mind: a rushed shot is a wasted shot. A rushed plan is a dead plan. At dawn she struck. Her first shot dropped the radio operator before he could send an alarm. Chaos erupted as the others scrambled for cover, shouting orders in their native tongue. Sarah moved from position to position, never staying still long enough to be targeted. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, half the camp was silent, the rest fleeing in terror. She pursued them for a short distance, then let them go intentionally. Fear would do more damage than bullets now. Those who escaped would carry tales of a ghostly sniper who struck from nowhere and vanished like smoke. By nightfall, she had seized their maps, supplies, and encrypted communications gear. Back at the ranger station, she pored over the captured intel. Her suspicion was confirmed. These men were just the first wave. Kirinov had established a network of operatives in the region, using safe houses and hidden caches to move weapons and personnel. If she was going to stop him, she would need to disrupt that network completely. Meanwhile, far away at a secure naval base, Rourke was dealing with his own storm. Reports of strange activity near Sarah's hometown were starting to reach command. Unexplained disappearances, gunfire in the woods, and sightings of armed men in unmarked vehicles. Rourke had kept Sarah's involvement off the official books, but now that decision was coming back to haunt him. If Kirinov's people were operating on U.S. soil, it wouldn't be long before higher authorities got involved. Dawson entered Rourke's office, his expression grim. "Sir, I've got fresh intel. Locals reported 2 SUVs driving into the mountains last night. No lights, no plates. This matches the vehicles we saw during the mission abroad." Rourke's gut twisted. "She's in the middle of this," he muttered. Dawson frowned. "Sir, with respect, why didn't you tell command about Whitlock? If they knew what she's capable of, they'd send a team to help her." Rourke slammed his fist on the table. "And then she'd disappear into a black site or end up being used as a pawn. Sarah's not a weapon for them to wield. She deserves better." Dawson nodded reluctantly, understanding but still uneasy. Rourke knew they couldn't just sit and wait. He began quietly assembling a small team, men he trusted completely, to move out without official sanction. If Sarah needed help, they would be there. Back in the mountains, Sarah struck again. Using the intel she'd gathered, she located one of Kirinov's safe houses nestled in a remote valley. This one was larger, better fortified, with at least 20 men stationed there. She didn't attack head-on. Instead, she began a campaign of psychological warfare. At night, she cut their power lines, leaving them fumbling in darkness. She rigged traps along their supply routes, making it dangerous for anyone to move without risking injury or death. She even broadcast snippets of recorded gunfire and voices through speakers hidden in the trees, creating the illusion of a much larger force surrounding them. By the third night, paranoia had consumed the camp. Guards were turning on each other, shooting at shadows, terrified of an enemy they couldn't see. When Sarah finally struck, it was swift and decisive. She eliminated the leadership first, then let the rest scatter. Within hours, the safe house was empty and burning, its network severed. General Kirinov received the news with cold fury. Reports from his operatives were fragmented and fearful, full of talk about a phantom sniper who seemed to know their every move. He slammed his fist on the table, sending papers flying. "This is one woman," he roared at his staff. "One woman, and you let her dismantle everything we've built." His advisors remained silent, afraid to speak. Kirinov leaned over the table, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Find her. I don't care what it takes. Burn the forests, slaughter the townspeople, poison the rivers if you must. But bring me her head." His obsession grew, blinding him to reason. He began diverting resources from his overseas operations, pulling men and weapons into the hunt for Sarah. It was exactly what she wanted. The more he focused on her, the less he could focus on anything else. As Sarah waged her one-woman war, she also began leaving subtle clues for Rourke, knowing he would come eventually. A carved symbol on a tree here, a carefully placed shell casing there. It was their unspoken signal, a way of saying she was alive and moving, but the situation was escalating. Sure enough, Rourke and his small team arrived in the area 3 days later, following her trail. They found the remains of battles fought in silence. Burned camps, enemy weapons scattered in the dirt, bodies buried deep and hidden. Dawson was shaken by what he saw. "Sir," he said quietly, "she's fighting a war by herself." Rourke nodded grimly. "And she's winning." But he also saw the danger. Kirinov's forces were growing desperate, and desperate men made reckless moves. The showdown came sooner than anyone expected. Sarah intercepted a transmission from a captured radio that chilled her blood. Kirinov's men were planning to attack the nearest town at dawn, using civilians as bait to draw her out. She couldn't allow that. She moved through the night with relentless speed, reaching the outskirts of the town just as the first enemy vehicles appeared on the horizon. She set up on a rooftop, her rifle steady, her breathing calm. As the trucks rolled in, she began picking off drivers and gunners with deadly precision. Chaos erupted immediately. Panicked enemy soldiers fired wildly, some abandoning their vehicles altogether. Sarah's shots were unerring, each one a lifeline for the townsfolk cowering in their homes. In the midst of the battle, Rourke's team arrived, crashing into the enemy's flank with ruthless efficiency. For the first time since this began, Sarah wasn't fighting alone. She and Rourke worked in perfect sync, her rifle covering his team while they drove the attackers back. By sunrise, the streets were littered with wreckage and the town was safe. Sarah climbed down from her position, exhaustion etched into her face. Rourke approached, his expression a mix of relief and anger. "You should have called me," he said. Sarah shook her head. "There wasn't time. And this isn't over. Kirinov will keep coming until one of us is dead." Rourke met her gaze, understanding the weight of her words. "Then we finish it together," he said firmly. For the first time, Sarah allowed herself a small, determined smile. The hunt wasn't over, but now she wasn't alone. Sarah and Rourke didn't waste a moment after the battle for the town. As the sun rose over the wreckage, smoke curling into the pale morning sky, they knew Kirinov would already be regrouping and planning his next strike. Dawson and the rest of Rourke's men gathered weapons and supplies from the enemy dead while Sarah crouched over the captured radio, carefully tuning it to intercept more transmissions. Her hands were steady, but inside she felt a familiar cold fire. Kirinov had crossed every line, bringing the fight to innocent civilians, using fear and violence to draw her out. He wasn't just a threat to her anymore, he was a threat to everyone in these mountains. She decoded the garbled messages with frightening speed, piecing together fragments of Russian and coded phrases. Finally, her expression hardened. "He's moving his main force to the old mine at Devil's Gorge," she said, standing and looking at Rourke. "It's remote, easily defensible, and there's only one road in or out. If he's gathering his men there, it means he's preparing for a final strike." Rourke stepped closer, his voice low. "Then we take the fight to him before he can strike again. We end this on our terms." Sarah's eyes met his, unwavering. "No. We don't just attack. We dismantle him. Completely." Rourke studied her for a long moment, then nodded. He knew better than to argue with her instincts. The two of them worked quickly, laying out a plan while Dawson and the others listened intently. Sarah's knowledge of the terrain was their greatest asset. She drew a rough map in the dirt, marking choke points, hidden paths, and sniper positions. "Kirinov will expect us to come straight up the road," she explained. "We won't. We'll hit them from above, from the cliffs here and here. I'll position myself here with a clear line of sight to their command post. Once I take out their communications and leadership, you move in with your team and cut them off before they can retreat." Dawson frowned, glancing at the map. "That's a lot of ground for just a handful of us." Sarah's mouth curved in a cold smile. "We don't need numbers. We need precision." There was no hesitation in her voice, no doubt. She had been hunted, driven from her home, forced to fight alone for too long. Now, with Rourke at her side, she was ready to strike back with everything she had. That night they moved into position. The mountains were cloaked in mist, the moon hidden behind heavy clouds, perfect cover for their approach. Sarah led the way, her movements silent and sure. Rourke's men followed close behind, their gear carefully secured to avoid noise. When they reached the high ridge overlooking Devil's Gorge, Sarah dropped to her stomach and crawled forward to peer over the edge. Below, the enemy camp sprawled like a nest of vipers. Fires burned in oil drums, casting flickering shadows over tents and vehicles. Armed men patrolled in tight formations, their movements disciplined and purposeful. At the center of it all was a large command tent, lit from within, where Kirinov himself likely waited. Sarah's sharp eyes took in every detail, calculating ranges and angles. She pointed out positions to Rourke in a whisper. 2 snipers on the east side ridge. Machine gun nest near the fuel depot. And see that truck near the command tent? It's probably carrying their communications gear. First shot takes that out. Rourke nodded, his jaw tight. He trusted her completely. As the hours crept by, the camp settled into an uneasy rhythm. Guards rotated, vehicles were refueled, and the distant howl of a wolf carried through the cold night air. Sarah adjusted her scope, breathing slow and steady. This was the moment she had been building toward. Every shot, every trap, every calculated strike she'd made over the past weeks had led Kirinov to this place, to this final confrontation. She waited for the exact moment when the guard rotations overlapped, creating a brief window of vulnerability. Then she exhaled and squeezed the trigger. The communications truck exploded in a shower of sparks and flame, throwing the camp into instant chaos. Shouts rang out as men scrambled to respond, unsure where the attack was coming from. Before they could recover, Sarah's second shot took out the eastern sniper, then the third dropped the western one. Rourke and his men used the confusion to move in, silent and deadly, cutting through the outer perimeter like ghosts. By the time the enemy realized they were under a full-scale assault, it was too late. Kirinov stormed out of his command tent, his face twisted with rage. He barked orders in Russian, trying to rally his men, but his voice was nearly drowned out by gunfire and explosions. Sarah shifted her aim to him, her finger tightening on the trigger. But at the last second she saw a flash of movement, a civilian hostage dragged in front of him as a human shield. She cursed under her breath and adjusted her position. Kirinov was cunning and ruthless, using anyone and anything to protect himself. Instead of firing at him directly, Sarah began targeting his lieutenants, one by one, until he was isolated and surrounded by terrified, demoralized soldiers. Rourke's team pushed deeper into the camp, taking out heavy weapons and securing prisoners. Dawson radioed in, his voice taut with adrenaline. "Command post secure. Fuel depot neutralized. Kirinov's forces are breaking." Rourke glanced up toward Sarah's position, knowing she was watching everything unfold. They were close now, so close to ending this nightmare. But Kirinov wasn't finished yet. With a guttural roar, he grabbed a nearby rifle and opened fire on his own men, forcing them to fight or flee. Then he turned and sprinted toward a narrow path leading deeper into the mountains, dragging the hostage with him. Sarah didn't hesitate. She slid down the ridge with practiced speed, moving parallel to the path to cut him off. Rourke shouted after her, but she didn't slow. This was personal. Kirinov had destroyed her home, killed her friends, terrorized her town. She wouldn't let him escape. She reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the path just as he passed below. Her breathing steadied, her mind went silent, and she took the shot. The bullet struck his leg, dropping him instantly. The hostage tumbled free, scrambling to safety as Kirinov howled in pain. Sarah descended quickly, rifle trained on him. Rourke and Dawson arrived seconds later, weapons ready. Kirinov glared up at Sarah, his teeth bared in defiance. You think killing me will stop this? He spat. There will always be others. Men like me never die. Sarah's voice was calm, almost cold. Maybe. But you won't hurt anyone else ever again. Without another word she fired. The shot was final, echoing through the gorge like the closing of a chapter. Silence fell over the battlefield. The remaining enemy soldiers dropped their weapons, surrendering to Rourke's men. The fight was over. As dawn broke, Sarah stood on the ridge overlooking the smoking ruins of Kirinov's camp. Rourke joined her, his face lined with exhaustion and relief. It's done, he said quietly. Sarah nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. For now. There will be others like he said. But at least this one won't haunt these mountains anymore. Rourke placed a hand on her shoulder. You don't have to face them alone anymore, Sarah. Whatever comes next, we face it together. For a long moment she didn't respond. Then finally she allowed herself a small, tired smile. She had been a lone wolf for so long, fighting in the shadows. But now, for the first time, she felt like part of something greater. As they descended back toward the town, Dawson reported that civilians were safe and enemy prisoners were being transported for interrogation. The townsfolk emerged cautiously from hiding, their eyes wide with gratitude and awe. They had seen Sarah as a quiet, unassuming woman for years. Now they understood the truth, that she was their protector, their unseen guardian. Sarah accepted their thanks with humility, knowing she had done what was necessary, nothing more. She didn't seek glory or recognition. She only wanted peace. But deep down she knew that peace was fragile. And when the next storm came she would be ready. Rourke glanced at her as they walked side by side, his voice low. What will you do now? Sarah looked toward the mountains, their peaks glowing in the morning light. Live, she said simply. For as long as I can. And with that they walked on, leaving the battlefield behind but carrying its lessons forever. The following weeks passed in a blur of rebuilding, investigation, and uneasy calm. Though Kirinov was dead and his network shattered, Sarah knew better than to believe the threat had ended entirely. Men like him always left shadows behind, remnants of their power that would fester if not rooted out completely. She spent her days helping the townsfolk repair their homes, fortify their defenses, and restore a sense of normalcy. The people treated her with a mixture of awe and gratitude now, whispering her name like that of a legend. But Sarah didn't care for legends. She moved quietly among them, offering guidance when asked, never seeking praise. Rourke stayed close during this time, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of the world beyond these mountains. His team assisted with cleanup and security, blending into the community surprisingly well. Dawson, in particular, seemed to enjoy working alongside the locals, his usual stern demeanor softening as he taught them basic defensive tactics. Still, Sarah noticed the tension in Rourke's shoulders whenever they spoke privately. He was waiting for something, holding back a truth she hadn't yet forced him to reveal. She could see it in his eyes every time they met hers. Late one evening, as the last of the daylight faded and the town settled into quiet, Rourke finally broke his silence. They were sitting outside the old ranger station, watching the stars emerge one by one in the clear night sky. Rourke's voice was low, almost reluctant. Sarah, there's something you need to know. While we were interrogating the prisoners, we found out Kirinov wasn't acting alone. He had backing, from people with resources and influence far beyond anything we've seen here. Sarah didn't flinch. She had suspected as much deep down. How far does it go? She asked simply. Rourke sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. Far enough that taking out Kirinov was just the first move in a much bigger game. There's a group operating internationally, funding mercenary operations like his. We've identified 2 names so far, but there's likely more. And they know about you now. Sarah turned her gaze back to the darkened forest, her expression unreadable. Then they'll come for me, she said. And when they do, I'll be ready. Rourke leaned closer, urgency in his tone. Sarah, listen to me. You can't fight this war alone. These people aren't just soldiers with rifles. They've got intelligence networks, politicians in their pocket, entire governments looking the other way. If we don't hit them strategically, they'll crush anyone who stands against them. Sarah was silent for a long moment before answering. I understand. But I won't let them burn these mountains to the ground to get to me. The next day they began preparing in earnest. Rourke contacted a few trusted allies outside official channels, bringing in supplies and equipment without drawing attention. Sarah guided the townsfolk in building hidden caches of food and water, reinforcing safe houses, and setting up lookouts along the roads. It was a strange mix of old and new tactics. modern technology meshing with the timeless instincts of survival she had learned from her father. At night, she and Rourke would sit together, studying maps and satellite images by the glow of a single lantern. Each new piece of intel painted a clearer picture of their enemy's reach. There were supply chains stretching across borders, shell companies laundering money, and coded messages hinting at future operations. Dawson, ever the skeptic, muttered darkly as he reviewed the data. It's like cutting the head off a hydra. Every time we take out one piece, 3 more pop up. Sarah's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. Then we keep cutting until there's nothing left. One evening, Sarah slipped away into the forest alone. She needed space to think, to clear her mind before the storm that was surely coming. As she moved silently through the moonlit trees, memories surfaced unbidden. Her father's voice teaching her how to track deer, how to read the wind, how to remain unseen until the perfect moment. The cabin where she had grown up, now reduced to ash and rubble by Kirinov's men. The first time she had ever picked up a rifle, feeling its weight and promise. All of it had led to this moment, to this fight. She paused at a familiar clearing, the one where she had once trained tirelessly to perfect her aim. Kneeling in the grass, she whispered a silent vow to those she had lost. I won't let their sacrifices be for nothing. I'll fight until there's no fight left in me. The forest seemed to answer with a gentle breeze, as if offering its silent support. When she returned to camp, her resolve was unshakable. 2 days later, the first sign of renewed danger appeared. A patrol discovered strange tire tracks near the southern road, heavy vehicles, recent and definitely not local. Sarah examined the tracks herself, crouching low to study the impressions in the dirt. They're scouting us, she said grimly. Testing our defenses before they make a move. Rourke immediately tightened security, doubling patrols and setting up hidden surveillance cameras. That night, the townsfolk were gathered in the square when Sarah addressed them directly for the first time. Her voice was steady, carrying easily in the cool night air. Some of you know what we've been through already. Others have only heard whispers. The truth is, the men we fought weren't just criminals. They were part of something bigger, something that won't stop unless we stop it. There may come a day soon when they try to take this town, your homes, your families. When that day comes, we stand together. We fight smart and we fight as one. Murmurs of fear rippled through the crowd, but Sarah's calm presence seemed to steady them. By the time she finished speaking, there was determination in their eyes. The following week was tense and grueling. Scouts reported more enemy activity on the outskirts of the mountains. Sarah spent long hours setting traps, planning ambushes, and coordinating with Rourke's team. Each night, she returned to the ranger station to debrief, her exhaustion hidden behind a mask of focus. Rourke began to worry about her, seeing how much she carried on her shoulders. One evening he caught her alone, cleaning her rifle by lantern light. Sarah, he said gently, you can't keep doing this without rest. Even the strongest soldier burns out eventually. She looked up at him, her expression tired but resolute. I'll rest when they're gone. Until then, I can't afford to stop. Rourke knelt beside her, his voice firm. You're not alone anymore. Let us share the burden. For a moment, her eyes softened, and she allowed herself to lean against him, just for a heartbeat. Then she straightened back to business. We move at dawn, she said. There's a supply convoy coming through the western pass. If we cut it off, we send a message. The ambush was swift and brutal. Sarah and Rourke's team struck from hidden positions, their precision overwhelming the enemy before they could react. Trucks were disabled, weapons seized, and prisoners taken for questioning. Among the captured was a man carrying encrypted documents. When Dawson decrypted them, the information inside was chilling. It detailed a planned attack on multiple towns, not just Sarah's. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control, using fear and violence to destabilize entire regions. Rourke slammed his fist on the table as he read the intel. They're escalating. If we don't stop them now, it's going to spread far beyond these mountains. Sarah's voice was cold and certain. Then we hit them first. Hard. As preparations for their next move began, Sarah felt the weight of what lay ahead. The battle with Kirinov had been personal, but this was something larger, something that could determine the fate of countless innocent lives. She walked the perimeter of the town that night, pausing at each sentry post, offering quiet words of encouragement to the guards. When she returned to the ranger station, Rourke was waiting. You don't have to carry this alone, he reminded her softly. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes fierce but tired. I know. But I'm the one who brought this fight here. I have to see it through. Rourke reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Then we'll see it through together. For the first time in weeks, Sarah allowed herself a small, genuine smile. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She would never stop fighting for the people she loved. At dawn, as the first light touched the peaks of the mountains, Sarah stood ready, her rifle slung across her back, her resolve unbroken. The war wasn't over, it was only just beginning. And this time she wasn't just a lone hunter in the shadows. She was part of a force that would stand against the darkness, no matter the cost. The morning air was crisp and biting as Sarah stood on the ridge overlooking the western pass, her sharp eyes scanning the valley below. The sun had barely begun to rise, painting the snow-capped peaks with streaks of pale gold, but her mind was already locked in combat mode. Today would decide everything. After weeks of preparation, ambushes, and intelligence gathering, the enemy's full network had been exposed. Rourke's decrypted intel had revealed their plan. Simultaneous strikes on multiple towns, spreading terror and chaos while their organization seized control of vital supply routes and communications hubs. If they succeeded, it wouldn't just destroy Sarah's home, it would destabilize entire regions, leaving countless lives at their mercy. Rourke joined her on the ridge, binoculars in hand, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Scouts report heavy movement," he said, his voice low but steady. "Trucks, armored vehicles, at least 50 men, maybe more. This is their spearhead." Sarah nodded once, no fear showing in her eyes. "Good. If we cut them off here, the rest of their operation falls apart." Rourke studied her profile, admiring her unshakable resolve. "You know this won't be easy," he said quietly. Sarah didn't look at him. "Nothing worth fighting for ever is." Down below, the enemy convoy moved steadily along the winding road, engines rumbling like a distant storm. Sarah had chosen this location for the ambush carefully. The narrow pass forced vehicles to travel single file, with sheer cliffs on one side and a steep drop on the other. There would be no room to maneuver, no escape once the trap was sprung. Hidden among the rocks and trees were Sarah's people, the townsfolk she had trained personally, along with Rourke's team. Makeshift barricades had been erected at strategic choke points, and improvised explosives were buried beneath the road. Sarah had spent the entire night checking each position herself, ensuring nothing was left to chance. As she lay prone with her rifle, she could see Dawson. Crouched near the detonator, his expression tense but focused. Rourke's men were spread out across the high ground, ready to unleash a storm of fire at her signal. This wasn't just a battle. It was the culmination of everything they had fought for, every sacrifice made since Kirinov first brought war to their doorstep. The first truck entered the kill zone, its tires crunching over the gravel. Sarah exhaled slowly, her finger resting lightly on the trigger. In that moment, time seemed to stretch. She could hear the wind whispering through the pines, the distant cry of a hawk overhead, the faint hum of engines below. Her mind was perfectly clear. This was what she had been born for, what her father had unknowingly prepared her for, with every lesson in patience, precision, and survival. When the second truck followed the first into the narrowest part of the pass, she gave the signal. Dawson slammed his hand down on the detonator, and the world erupted in fire and thunder. The road beneath the lead truck exploded, flipping it onto its side in a spray of dirt and metal. The second truck plowed into the wreckage, blocking the rest of the convoy. Panicked shouts rang out as soldiers scrambled for cover, only to be met by a withering hail of gunfire from above. Sarah's rifle cracked once, twice, 3 times, each shot precise and final. Enemy fighters fell before they even knew where the attack was coming from. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Rourke's men moved like ghosts among the rocks, striking and vanishing before the enemy could retaliate. The townsfolk, though less experienced, fought with a ferocity born of desperation. They weren't just defending land, they were defending their families, their futures. Sarah moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted. She picked off enemy commanders, machine gunners, and radio operators with deadly efficiency, her presence turning the tide of the fight. Explosions shook the pass as more charges were detonated, trapping the enemy in a deadly funnel. Still, they fought with fanatical determination, driven by orders from leaders who would never set foot on this battlefield. Dawson took a hit to the shoulder but kept firing, gritting his teeth against the pain. Rourke dragged him behind cover and pressed a field dressing to the wound. "Stay with me," he growled. Dawson managed a grim smile. "Wouldn't dream of leaving, sir." Hours seemed to pass in minutes as the battle raged. When the enemy finally began to break, Sarah knew it was time to press the advantage. She leapt down from her vantage point and advanced with the others, her rifle slung across her back as she drew a sidearm for close combat. The enemy's formation collapsed under the relentless assault, their survivors scattering in all directions. But Sarah wasn't interested in killing every last one. She wanted prisoners, sources of information who could help her dismantle the rest of the network. Rourke's team moved in swiftly, subduing the remaining fighters and securing the vehicles. When the last shot echoed away into silence, the battlefield was theirs. Smoke hung heavy in the air, mingling with the stench of oil and blood. Sarah stood amidst the wreckage, chest heaving, eyes scanning for any sign of renewed danger. Slowly the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But there was no time to rest yet. The captured enemy documents and equipment would need to be analyzed immediately. Back at the ranger station, the atmosphere was electric with urgency. Dawson, his arm bandaged, worked feverishly with the intel team to decrypt files taken from the convoy. Sarah paced the room like a caged predator, her mind racing. Rourke finally caught her arm, forcing her to stop. "Sarah, breathe," he said gently. "We won today. Give yourself a moment to feel that." She shook her head. "We won a battle, not the war. There's still more out there. This was just one piece of their plan." As if on cue, Dawson let out a sharp exclamation. "Got something?" Everyone crowded around as he pointed to a decoded message on the screen. It was a list of names, locations, and coded financial transactions. Rourke's eyes widened as he read. "This is it. The leadership. The people pulling the strings." Sarah leaned in, her voice low and dangerous. "Then we cut off the head of the snake." Over the next 48 hours they planned with meticulous care. The intel revealed that the enemy leadership would be meeting at a remote airstrip just beyond the mountains, believing themselves safe and untouchable. Sarah insisted on leading the strike herself. "This ends where it began," she told Rourke. "No more running. No more hiding." Rourke wanted to argue, but he saw the fire in her eyes and knew there was no stopping her. At dawn their small strike team moved out, traveling light and fast. Sarah led the way, her every step sure and silent. When they reached the airstrip, they found a cluster of sleek black vehicles parked near a waiting plane. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, but their confidence made them sloppy. Sarah and her team slipped into position undetected. At her signal, they struck with surgical precision. The firefight was brief but intense, ending with the enemy leaders either captured or dead. For the first time, the true architects of the chaos were exposed to the light. As the sun rose higher, Sarah stood on the tarmac, staring at the enemy's plane. It represented everything they had built: their power, their arrogance, their belief that they could move freely above the law. Rourke approached quietly, his face etched with both pride and concern. "It's over," he said softly. Sarah shook her head. "No, it's never over. There will always be others. But at least now people will know the truth." Together, they watched as the captured leaders were loaded into vehicles for transport. The fight had cost them dearly, but it had also united them in ways they hadn't imagined. Dawson walked up, his arm still in a sling, and gave Sarah a crooked grin. "So what now? You going to disappear back into the woods and let us clean up the mess?" Sarah glanced at Rourke, then back at Dawson. "Not this time. This time I stay. We rebuild, we watch, and we make damn sure nothing like this ever happens again." Weeks later the town began to heal. Roads were cleared, homes rebuilt, and life slowly returned to a semblance of normalcy. Sarah often walked through the streets in the early morning, nodding to townsfolk who now greeted her openly, no longer whispering her name in secret. They understood who she was and, more importantly, why she had fought. Rourke remained by her side, his team rotating in and out to provide ongoing support. One evening, as they stood together on the ridge overlooking the valley, he asked quietly, "Do you ever think about leaving? About finding somewhere peaceful, far away from all this?" Sarah was silent for a long moment, then answered softly, "Peace isn't a place, Rourke. It's a choice. And I choose to fight for it right here." He nodded, understanding. As night fell and the stars emerged, Sarah felt a deep, steady calm settle over her. The war wasn't truly over, there would always be new threats, new battles. But for now they had won. And as long as she drew breath, she would be ready to stand between her people and the darkness, no matter the cost. The end.